welcome along to the On the Whistle podcast. I'm your host, Zayn Nabbi. Joining me today, the one and only Alistair Howorth from Edinburgh. Ali, how are you doing?
Zayn, I am doing well. There's nothing better than watching the Champions League. I mean, and by Champions League, I don't mean none of this, Declan Rice 3-0 Arsenal nonsense. No. I mean CAF Champions
We're
League,
talking
proper
CAF
football.
Champions League. So, our braai is cooking today. And as we always say, we are Africa's biggest football braai here at On the Whistle. So if you want to get in touch, hit us up at OTW_podcast on X and Instagram, or you can search for the On the Whistle podcast on YouTube or Facebook. Join our community, post your comments, give us likes, subscribe. We need you to grow this community. We want to have the biggest, most vocal discussion you can find. And Ali, we have a lot to sink our teeth into. We know the semi-finalists for the CAF Champions League. There's a lot of talking points. It's very fresh, and we're going to get straight into it. I mean, I got to ask you this. Before we get into the individual games and review the quarterfinals, what did you make of the semi-final lineup, and what was your overarching view of the quarters?
Yeah, Zayn, I thought it was kind of a good example of what African football brings to the table, right? In term over the course of these two legs, you had a kind of brilliant. You kind of had everything. You had the Pirates players before their first game against Mamelodi in Algiers, like spreading dust on the pitch with accusations of them using Muthi to win the game, and the Mamelodi fans kind of chanting Allahu Akbar to kind of and pouring water on the pitch to cleanse it. You had that element of it. You had some fantastic tifos. The Esperance won against Sundowns yesterday was beautiful. You had the Zamalek fans in numbers.
You're talking about
chanting.
the tifo that had the Tokolosh reference, which is effectively a South African leprechaun. But he comes to cause all sorts of mischief in Southern African folklore.
And this is what I mean, Zay. Like Tunisian football fans, in what other walk of life would some working class guys from a part of Tunis be researching and learning and understanding about South African leprechauns, and learning about South African kind of folk kind of religion and traditions. It's amazing. And in the same with the vice versa. You have people learning about why they're pouring. In North Africa, they pour water on to cleanse it. Because that's part of the sacred tradition there in terms of reading the Quran over water. In Kenya, it's not reading the Quran over the water, but you write Quran verses in paper and then dip that in water, and that's what makes the water. And you're learning about this, but you'd never encounter that in any other walk of life. This is why I love football. And you have the atmosphere in Meknes in Morocco, and ASFAR almost made the comeback against Pyramids yesterday. Like, it's just like a brilliant kind of representation of African football across the continent. And that's why I love CAF Champions League football. That's why I love African football. So for me, on the pitch, it's exactly what we expect. Teams going away from home, putting on strong defensive performances, some brilliant goals, some great defending, some attritional football as you'd expect on the continent, and some fantastic stuff off the pitch. And so I think it's been a great kind of round of quarterfinals. I think it's a really, really interesting semi-final matchup.
Yeah, well, let's get right into it. You had Orlando Pirates overcoming MC Alger. Pirates coming out on top, reaching their first Champions League semi-final since 2013. What did you make of their performance?
I thought, look, Orlando Pirates have kind of shown themselves under Jose Rivero to be cup kind of masters. We've seen in the last couple of years cleaning up in terms of the MTNA, the Nedbank Cup, the Carling Cup, in South Africa. And the big question this season was, could they do it on the continent? They've shown that they can win the cups in South Africa. They've shown that they can win those big games. Can they do it on the continent? And the answer, Zayn, is yes. They've been incredible this tournament. They've gone away from home to Cairo and won. They've gone away from home to Algiers and beat CR Belouizdad in the group stage. They went away to Algiers again in the quarterfinals and beat MC Alger. And then in all of those games then, just like their game against Al Ahly at home, they bring them back to Soweto, bring them to Orlando Stadium, and they put on they shut the game down, and I thought that's what they did really well today. Actually, it wasn't an exciting game to watch. It wasn't a thrilling game by any
No.
means. 0-0, 1-0 on aggregate. Jobs good, and I think what they did really well is they didn't play attacking football. They let Mamelodi keep the ball. Mamelodi dominated the ball, but it was
Mhm.
really stale. And Pirates looked to play on the break, kind of what they did in the first game. They weren't quite so direct. They played through the lines a bit more, and I think they came closest to scoring. Obviously, they hit the post in added time. But Mamelodi, aside from the penalty shot they had when Dean Van Ruyen kind of clipped Drowie in the last minute of the game, they didn't really create any kind of clear cut chances. And look, Mamelodi aren't a brilliant attacking team, but for Pirates to shut them down like that, I think was a really good job. I think under Jose Rivera, they've played some really exciting attacking football, but what they've shown is they're adaptable. And they played a back five in the first leg, went to a back four, brought in Van Ruyen, pushed Dion
Mhm.
Hotto up to use his pace on the break as well. Then they could bring on guys like Patrick Masangani off the bench. And it just shows that this team is serious. They've got depth. They've got the ability to play in lots of different ways. And they're at the beginning of the tournament, I said that they were my dark horse as an outside because of their track record in cup competitions. And to be honest, they've done so well. I did not think that they would
Mhm.
do this well. In both in terms of their group, topping the group, and now beating Maludia. So it's brilliant, brilliant performance in both legs for Pirates.
Yeah, certainly something to be said about the coaching. Jose Rivero has done brilliantly at Orlando Pirates. I was in Durban at the MTN 8 Cup final when he won that trophy, again, cementing himself as a cup specialist. This time in the CAF Champions League, they've beaten another major team. What do you make of his coaching, and how does he continue to fell the Giants and continue to have this Pirates team being so in tune in cup tournaments?
Yeah, I think it's Jose is an interesting guy, right? He's not a big personality. He's not a kind of big guy who's yelling and coming in with lots of noise. He's kind of quiet. It seems like quiet, kind of kind, kind of straightforward, reasonable man. And I think he's come in from day one. He's kind of worked really hard to calm the noise around Pirates, because let's be honest, Zane, Pirates and Chiefs, they've been two clubs that in over the last kind of decade, with the odd exception, have been in free fall in many ways. And what he's done with Pirates is he kind of steadied the ship. It wasn't pretty at first. I think he wasn't super popular at first. There was a lot of kind of criticism of him, but he's shown over the course of the seasons he's been there. He's now in his third season that he's building towards attacking football. But what's really impressed me was even right from the off, he showed that he could set up a good defensive team in those one-off games, and that's why he's done well in the cups. And yes, I think the big red flag, I guess, criticism of him this season would be the fact that in the league they never came close to Sundowns, and this was the year to catch Sundowns, with Rulani leaving, with
Mm.
Mankoba not having a great start. With Miguel Cardoso, credit to him, has done really well since he's come in. But I think that's probably the one red flag you'd flag of Jose. But he's done so well, and this also comes off the back of him announcing that he's going to be leaving at the end of the season. I think he's managed that brilliantly. Like he kind of brought it up, he announced it, and then at the press conference before the game, he didn't entertain any questions about it. It was like, nope, I'm not here to talk about this. We're here to focus on the game, and he kind of killed that noise. And again, like we've said, Pirates and Chiefs, there's two clubs that generate so much noise, and I think that's something he's
Mm.
done really well. Is he's calmed that down, he's settled it down, and look, you know, if could he go on and sign off with the Champions League, I think that would cement him as one of the kind of greats, particularly in the
Mm.
21st century in terms of Orlando Pirates. Bear in mind they haven't won it. They haven't won the Champions League since the 90s. I think they reached the final in 2013. That's the last time they've gotten this far. So I think he's done brilliantly, and I think he's kind of brought about with him that kind of calm, collected kind of coaching style, which has put him in very good stead. And it's a shame that he's leaving at the end of the season, because he's done so well, and I think he's been a great addition to the PSL. And I think, again, could he push on and challenge Sundowns? It's so hard with the money Sundowns have,
Mhm.
but I would have loved to see him stay, and I hope that he stays in Africa. Who knows? Who knows where he'll go? But I hope he stays on the continent.
Well, you touched on Sundowns. They managed to get through against Esperance, away for thin aggregate, 1-0 overall, was 0-0 in the second leg. Hardly fun to watch that. Forgive me, that's Courtney Freeze calling me, guys. As you can see, he wants to join the pod. but it's too late. Ali and I have kicked it off and he's missed the kickoff time. So to bring it back to Sundowns, they got the job done in Tunis. Surely Miguel Cardoso must be feeling pretty good about that, Ali.
It must be very, very rare for a manager to start a season at a club, get sacked by them, go to a club that is what 10,000 kilometers away on the virtually quarter of the way around the world almost, and then knock out his former team in the Champions League knockout stages. And not only that, the team that he himself knocked out with his original team last season. Remember, Esperance beat Sundowns in the semifinals last year. So there's a lot of kind of narratives coming to close there with Miguel Cardoso kind of winning on Tunisian soil in Radis. With the team that he knocked out last year and the team that he's joined, and it makes you question Esperance so much because they have a really, really young and exciting team. You think about the particular, they didn't start all three of their midfielders this game, but with Konate, with Obelu, they've got a really young core of midfielders there. They brought in back in Tukad into the game last night to try and kind of give them a bit more creativity going forward from the base to allow Konate to get further forward in a way that he wasn't able to in the first leg. But I think Sundowns did a really good job, and that was the big question, Zayn, coming into this year was Rulani has made Sundowns probably into the best ball playing team on the continent. They played the best football, potentially the best football African football has seen, but they had a glass jaw. They were fragile in these big games. They got knocked out by Wydad in the semifinals a couple of years ago. They got knocked out by Esperance, by these kind of more physical North African teams that were quite canny. But what Miguel Cardoso has brought in is, yes, the football hasn't been as exciting, football hasn't been as thrilling, but they've been defensively resilient in a way that I think they struggled to be under Rulani Mokwena. They looked quite good in that first leg. They got the one goal that they needed. Peter Shalalule always kind of coming up big as you want him to. But then this game, they were defensively really solid. Shout out to some certain players like Divine Lunga, who came in, was so good at left back, shackled Jan Sass, who obviously is kind of the creative hub on one side when you have Belele on the other. Jan Sass was kind of nowhere to be seen, and a huge part of that was Divine Lunga having an excellent game at fullback. And I think Sundowns just managed the game really well, again, in a similar way to what we saw with Pirates. I think, if anything, Sundowns were the team that created more chances, over the course of the game, certainly over the course of the two legs. And if that Allende chance when he struck that ball from 25, 30 yards, smashed the crossbar, that should have deserved to go in, because what a goal that would have been. But Lucas Ribeiro, another excellent game from him. I thought he was really sharp. And this is what Miguel Cardoso brings to a team. He makes them solid. He makes them rigid defensively. And yeah, they saw out the game. And I think the kind of wave of Esperance attack that we were expecting to come in that second half just didn't come. Obviously in the first half, you expect them to be a little kind of more conservative, but they really only created that chance right at the beginning. But Ronwen Williams made a brilliant save, probably the save of the round, to keep the Sundowns in it. But kind of after that, Esperance didn't really create much. And as the game kind of wore on, you were expecting them to kind of bring on the wave of attack, wing on the wave of attack, and it just never happened. I do feel bad for them because that one chance did come when Ashraf Jabri kind of clipped the ball over Ronwen Williams. Ronwen Williams, who did make that really good save, but I think actually had a pretty bad game. He was caught out a couple times, including that goal, that Ashraf Jabri, who came off the bench, kind of brilliant ball over the top, just really straightforward, flicked it over on Williams, and he was offsides by the smallest of margins. If I was an Esperance fan, I would be furious. Obviously, it's the right call. We get our little ruler out and we measure those lines. He was offsides, but it was incredibly cruel. So I think from Esperance, obviously it's a shame that their CAF Champions League season has ended here. I think it's their own fault, because obviously they sacked Cardoso after a slow start. They brought in the Romanian Renkenkav. They then sacked him a couple weeks before the quarterfinals, and now they've got Kanzari in, who's obviously managed the club a couple times. So there'll be big questions of whether he'll stay, because again, we spoke to Radi Jaidi about this when he was the Esperance coach. This is a club that just does not give you time to build. It is, and it's such a shame, because I think they spent really well. They bought in some really good players, like bringing back in Yusuf Belele. They've got these Brazilians in who are really good, and they're building towards a Club World Cup where they have a chance. Chelsea are a mess. They don't even know who that fourth club will be. They've got Flamengo, who haven't been very good, probably the worst Brazilian side, going to the Club World Cup. It's such an opportunity to build into something, but instead they've gone through three coaches. They might be onto their fourth by the time the Club World Cup comes around. So I think it's a shame, because I think this isn't a brilliant Sundowns team. It certainly isn't the best Al Ahly team we've seen in the last few years. This could have been a huge opportunity for Esperance, and I think they've kind of thrown it away, which is a huge shame. But Sundowns, I think they deserved it over the two legs. All credit to them, and I think a lot of credit goes to Miguel Cardozo.
Well, let's talk about Al Hilal and Al Ali. Al Ahly obviously through to the next round. Let's start with Al Hilal. The dream is over, but it was a brilliant run, wasn't it?
Zayn, I this is when I get frustrated about how kind of myopic football coverage is, because this is the greatest story of the year in football, in world football. Alongside maybe Sudan if they qualify for the World Cup. And we've spoken about it on this podcast many times. Al Hilal playing 5,000 kilometers away from home in Mauritania, completely cut off from their country. I bumped into a Sudanese, I think he was a construction worker here in Edinburgh at a cafe. I heard him on the phone, and I was like, "Oh, I've got to speak this. I've got to speak to this guy." So I started chatting to him, and he was telling me, "Oh, I'm a big Al Hilal fan," and I was asking, like, what does it mean to you to be seeing Al Hilal kind of playing in the Champions League, doing well? And he's like, "Look, they're carrying the weight of a nation in the same way that the Sudanese national team is carrying the weight of a nation in the way they qualified for the AFCON, the way that they've gone so well in their World Cup qualifiers." Al Hilal and Al Merrikh are the same, in particular Al Hilal. They are representing Sudan, even if they're half a continent away. And I think they've done marvelously. They lost all their foreigners when they moved to Mauritania. Florent Ibenge, so much credit goes to him. He was there in Khartoum when the civil war kicked off, and he had to flee to France. He stuck with them. He's done brilliantly. They topped their group, a tough group as well, with Mouloudia, with TP Mazembe, and they made it to the next round. And it's such a shame, because they topped their group. They get that first seed. Who do they get in the next round, Zayn? They get Al Ahly. The one team that you kind of can almost guarantee are more than happy to crushing the dreams of a nation.
You do not want them.
Yeah. Look, Al Ahly dominated in that first game. They got the 1-0 lead. They did really well. In the second game, I actually thought Al Hilal were the better team. They saw a lot more of the ball, but Al Ahly, they know what they're doing in these two-legged affairs. They defended deep. They let Al Hilal keep most of the ball, and they looked to play them on the break. And when you've got players like Imam Ashur, who's kind of playing on the right wing instead of through the middle like he usually does, we know him as this creative 10. But when you've got players like him, you can play defensively, you can play on the break, and you can, time your punches. We often talk about, make the analogy of, boxers, absorbing punches and picking their moment. And it felt like Al Ahly did that. Lovely ball over the top, and his kind of delightful little clip finish was enough to get them through to the next round. Look, this is an Al Ahly side that I think Marcel Koller has done so well with, right? They've had so many injuries, particularly in the back. They miss players like, Ashraf Dari, Yaya Atiat Allah have been injured for ages. They miss players further forward. Reda Slim, Mohammed have been missing. Akram Taufik came back into this game, but he's been missing for a lot of the season. They've had to bring in new players this season, like, Abu Ali, Ben Sharki, and Gradisar, the Slovenians, all coming in January. And they managed it so well. They have a depth that no other club on the continent has, and they managed it so well. And obviously, there's a lot of noise going on in the Egyptian Premier League. They forfeited that match against Zamalek, that huge derby, which they refused to play in. And, they're 3 points off Pyramids. So suddenly there's so much pressure on Al Ahly, but they're the masters of the pressure. They're the masters of managing that. And they've done it again against Al Hilal. And I think, 2-0, comfortable in the end, never really was in doubt. That's just what Al Ahly do, and credit to them.
Well, they're up against Sundowns next. I mean, what do you make of that tie? That's going to be a classic semi-final.
Yeah, this is appointment viewing, Zayn. Like, they have without a doubt for me, since Walid Regragui left Wydad, these have been the two giants of African football. Yes, Sundowns haven't made it to this final in the last few years, but these are the two teams that are on top of African football in terms of the football they play, the quality, the kind of pedigree that they bring, and I think Miguel Cardozo has enhanced that in many ways in Sundowns. Like we mentioned, the football maybe isn't quite so dominant, but he's kind of brought about that steel that he had at Esperance, and obviously Al Ahly have just been dominant for the five of recent Champions League, and that fifth one we all remember was that one against Wydad that was played one-legged in Casablanca, and just felt very unfair on I think Pizzo was still in charge at that point. Marcel Coller's come in. They've gone from strength to strength. Yes, like I mentioned, this season hasn't been quite the same electric kind of performances going forward. They've missed a lot of players like Hussein El Shahat. Percy Tau obviously is left, and he was kind of struggling towards the end. So this isn't the same caliber of Al Ahly team. This isn't quite the same dominant Sundowns team, but it's, I guess, in some ways maybe a more streetwise team, certainly more experienced. So I think this is. I'm not expecting a high scoring match in this round between those two. I think that semifinal is going to be tight. It's going to be cagey. I think it's going to be settled on away goals or penalties. But Zayn, this is appointment viewing. This is what the business end of the CAF Champions League is like. It's Sundowns versus Al Ahly. This is why we tune in to football on our continent, to see Egyptians and South Africans going head to head.
Too many Egyptians and too many South Africans. And we're about to wrap that up in the quarterfinals. I mean, certainly last but not least, we had ASFAR Rabat versus Pyramids. ASFAR winning 2-0, but still being knocked out on aggregate. Look, Pyramids obviously scraped through despite ASFAR mounting a comeback. What did you make of ASFAR's first campaign since 2007, Ali?
Yeah, I think ASFAR have been a kind of breath of fresh air in many ways. We're it's kind of part of the problem of football as it kind of modernizes and kind of money gets concentrated at the top. We see this in lots of different leagues, and we saw this for a time with Wydad. They looked like they were kind of going to run away with it, particularly when they were under Walid Regragui and they had that excellent team where they kept kind of getting really, really far. But they fell off it so hard thanks to kind of, in many ways, incompetence at the top of the club. Same with Raja. And I think it's really kind of opened things up for these kind of smaller but more interesting teams. And obviously, I don't want ASFAR Rabat fans coming at me because I know they're a club with a huge amount of history. Obviously, they've won the Champions League a long time ago. But them and Arsper kind of stepped into this gap. And I think it's been really enjoyable to watch the kind of football they play. They brought about a lot of excitement to the Champions League. And I'd say the same with Pyramids. Look, this, what I also love about ASFAR is they've kind of got this lovely mix. They've got these kind of Moroccan core of players, really exciting young players, and I think that what they've done is they've kind of augmented that with some of Africa's finest, which is what I love to see. I love to see African players performing well in the Champions League, getting moved to other African clubs. So, I'm thinking Toke Carneiro, who for me is the kind of African Marcelo, and I loved seeing him at Petro Luanda. Joel Bea came off the bench to score, and Enoch Baka, who's obviously was partnered Chancellor Mbemba for that Congolese side that made the semi-finals of the AFCON, was at Simba, did so well there, and got his move to Morocco. So I think ASFAR have been a brilliant addition. Will they qualify again? It'll be tight. Obviously, them and Wydad are kind of battling it out for that second place in the Batola Pro. But either way, I'd be happy to see them in this competition or the Confederations Cup. They just kind of got undone by their naivety in the first leg. They conceded that really stupid goal after 2 minutes. And they kind of were chasing it from there, and they chased it and chased it. That's the one thing you can't do in this continent. You chase it. They got that one goal, that away goal that kind of opened it up. And we thought, could it happen? El Fali scores that lovely, lovely goal, like lovely 1-2 with Aitor Khan. Brilliant finish. And then the pressure's on. They had so many chances. El Fadli was put in through that one-on-one. Then Joel Bea scores in the 82nd minute. The pressure heaps on. The atmosphere was great, even though it was being played in Meknes, not in Rabat. But they couldn't get the job done. And it's a shame because over the two legs, I don't think they were much worse than Pyramids, but I think they were naive. And I think Pyramids, the difference is Pyramids had the players that were efficient to get those goals in that first leg. And let's be fair to Pyramids. In this leg, they could have also scored goals. ASFAR rode their luck. Fista Maele had a goal ruled off for offsides. He came very close late on in the game. But I think it's a shame that ASFAR had to go out like this. But I think they've been a really good addition to the Champions League.
Yeah, well, Pyramids won the first leg 4-1, which gave them the big cushion going into the second leg. They now come up against Orlando Pirates. It's Pyramids' first CAF Champions League semi-final. We know that the team has had, shall we say, a short history but a successful history in Egyptian football before being launched into the Champions League. Right smile on your face there. Of all the semi-final matchups to get, you got to imagine that Pyramids would be quite happy getting Orlando Pirates. I know we spoke about them being the Cup Kings, but this is the match they would have wanted if they had their best shot at making a final. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think so. Look, I think Sundowns and Al Ahly are the heavyweights, right? That's the big one in terms of the weight of expectation. I think this is going to be the more fun semi-final. Look, Pyramids are the top goal scorers in this competition, and if there's one thing they're good at, Zayn, it is attacking football. When you've got a front three of Mayele, you've got Ramadan Sobi on the wing. You've got Sadiq Awajula also playing. You've got, and the most important, I think, of them all is probably Ibrahim Adel, the kind of creative winger who was close to moving to Europe on so many occasions. He's been really close to signing for clubs in France, and kind of Pyramids have kept them essentially not quite against his will, but they've held out for more money than I think other clubs would, which is a very Egyptian thing to do, I think. But he is so talented. And I think if Omar Marmoush wasn't there in the Egyptian national team, because he kind of plays off the left, Ibrahim Adel, I think, would be a much more regular in the Egyptian national team. And I personally hope that they'll move Marmoush centrally, bring in Adel. So they've got so much firepower, and they are the top goal scorers for a reason. They've scored so many goals. But I think the big but is that they are not great defensively. They've shown that. They've conceded a lot of silly goals, and even in this game, they're opened up. Obviously, they've got Ali Gaber, solid center back, been a great servant, 36 years of age. He's not fast. Same with Mohamed Hamdi, his partner. And when I look at the Pirates team, I see so many options going so forward and so much pace. Obviously, Evidence Makopa doesn't have the pace. He's more of a target man. But when you've got Nkota, when you've got Hato, when you've got Mofokeng running off him, when you've got Maswangani, if he comes in, that is a team with a lot of pace. That is a team that transitions well. So I think this is actually the semi-final I'm more kind of excited for in terms of the actual football, because I think these are two teams that have a lot going forward. And I think Pirates are the more balanced of the team, because I think, like we said, Pyramids can be caught on the break. But, and that's a big but, Pyramids have been excellent this season. They're top of the Egyptian Premier League. They're into the Egyptian Cup final. And they've only lost, this game against ASFAR was their first loss in 2025. I think they'd gone on 24 games unbeaten. And you'd have to go all the way back to, I think, a loss against Ismaili, was it, in November? In 2024 for their last loss in any competition. So they've been in excellent form. And while I think they've shown some naivety in this leg, and I think they showed it in the group stage when they kind of got out-muscled by Esperance, I think they're an excellent team. And I think this is a really, really tasty semi-final.
Well, the last question I'm going to ask you, and really quickly before we go to some viewer comments, I'm predicting an all South African final. Where does your head and heart lie, Ali?
Zayn, I wouldn't expect anything else.
So parochial, right?
That's a tough one, Zayn. Both of these semi-finals are so finely balanced. I'm going to go out on a limb. Well, it's not even going on a limb.
You can change it. We have enough time to figure this out, right?
I'll tell you again after the game, and we'll edit it in. No, I think if you really hold my feet over coals, I think I'll say Al Ahly versus Orlando Pirates in the final. I think it's going to be a rematch of the group stage.
African royalty right there.
Absolutely.
Watch it be Pyramid Sundowns. There we
exactly. Make fools of us.
Ali, it's been amazing recording with you, but I just want to bring in some viewer comments before we say goodbye. Obviously, great analysis on the quarters and looking ahead to the semis. And again, if you're listening out there and you have any thoughts, please get in touch. Leave a comment, ask us questions under the podcast, and just let us know what you think. We want to hear. Again, OTW_podcast on Instagram and on X. And if you want to post some comments on our YouTube or Facebook account, just search for the On the Whistle podcast. So last week you spoke about the Kenyan Revolution on the podcast. We had some comments. Really wonderful conversation, Ali. From Jimmy Manuel, and he says, "Good show, brother." That's obviously to you, Ali. "Hope you will dig more on African football clubs. Big up to you." And then we have Brian and Jerry. That sounds like a Kenyan name if I've heard one. "Interesting conversation. I'd love to see Kenyan football go to higher levels. which would be possible if corruption ceased. Thank you out there for your comments. We love to hear from you. We don't necessarily agree with them all. We don't necessarily reflect them on the pod, but we want to hear from you because you out there are our football community. Ali, it's been wonderful chopping it up. I wish you well, and I can't wait to talk with you again soon. Take care, my friend.